Hello and a warm Collisions YYC welcome to a very special guest today. Special for so many reasons, not least of which is that she's joining me from Zurich, Switzerland. Welcome to Kamales Lardi. How are you, Kamales?
Good. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Thank you so much for coming on. We met virtually on the Mesh conference stage for anyone who was involved in the Mesh conference. If you weren't, please check it out. It's a fantastic conference hosted in Calgary and Toronto, all about the intersection of humanity, business, science, technology. It's a great little melting pot for some out of the box thinking. And we had a fabulous conversation around the human side of digital transformation. And I'll be honest, selfishly, I wanted more. 40 minutes with you wasn't enough. I wanted to go a little bit deeper. So thanks for coming on. We'll start with an introduction that I'll allow you to do. You are the CEO of Lardi and Partner Consulting. Let us into the tent. Who are you? What do you do in the world? What gets you excited? And let's get into this very broad conversation on digital transformation.
Absolutely. And first of all, I have to say I really did enjoy the interaction we had at the Mesh conference as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here again. So I'm originally Malaysian, but I've lived and worked in Europe for over 20 years now. And I've got, I started off my career actually as a programmer in the late 90s. And,
very different world in the 90s than now, right? For that.
Absolutely. It's completely different. And, the technology has advanced so much. If I see the kind of AI technology available today to help people with programming, it really, reminds me of the days when we used to struggle with traditional, MS-DOS and SQLs and things like that. Yes. So a very different world. I entered into business advisory and management consulting in the early 2000s. I was with Accenture for a number of years, and then I joined Deloitte Consulting. I was the head of Deloitte Digital in Switzerland, and 12 years ago, in 2012, I actually started my own consulting company, Lardi and Partner Consulting. And so apart from that,
curious to narrow in, to be more to broaden out, or to just march to the beat of your own. I'm always curious that transition from working in the, quote unquote, the big four to doing your own thing. Was it to just the motivation? But it's always a little curious, the personal side of that jump.
That's a really, really good question. And I have a really good answer.
I thought you might.
So one part of it was I became a mom at the time, and consulting as an industry was not conducive for parenthood. On the other side, I started
18-hour days weren't conducive to parenthood.
18-hour days, weekends, and 6-7 days a week travel. Yeah. 4 months into having my daughter, I was told I needed to be in Austria for 4 months, and I said I couldn't travel because I had a 4-month-old at home, and I was told very quickly, well, then your career should take a back seat. And so that was one of the key.
That's we could have a whole other podcast just about that, but we'll park that on the side in the parking lot for now.
The other element was I started to recognize very quickly that technology was changing. There was this huge shift happening in 2010, 2011 with social media and the level of influence technology was having on people and companies. And I did write my first book back then, the social media strategy for business.
Oh, interesting.
A while back. And so at the time, I did recognize that traditional consulting was not keeping up with the shifts in technology, the types of projects that needed to be sold, the kinds of engagements we needed to have with companies. It was too much of a rigid structure. There were, too many kind of boundaries around the traditional consultancy that was not in alignment with the rapid development of technology. And so at the time, I figured I was heading up the digital area, and I thought, if I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this effectively, I need to have the flexibility to engage with companies on a very dynamic level. It has to be agile, it has to be dynamic, and we have to be able to expand and contract the engagements based on what the companies needed. And, it wasn't possible within the traditional consulting structures. And so I thought, I'm going to start my own company and might as well go out there and see what the world is like. And it was tough and very, very rewarding as well. And so 12 years in, I can say, no regrets. I'm really excited and happy that I took that path, and it paid off basically.
Well, and you were truly customer centric in the sense that I'm helping companies respond to what's going on, but I'm responding to them in a way that actually doesn't align. If I read between the lines of what you said.
It takes us back
which
again
has changed
to the human side,
which has changed. That's the journey, right? And there's always someone ahead and someone behind and a whole bunch of messiness in the middle.
Absolutely. And it takes us back to that human element as well, because what we sometimes forget as consultants is companies are made up of people. And so clients are people too.
Yes, they are. We'll leave that one right where it is. But yeah, all these roadmaps and all these plans and all these strategies, there is a group of humans that need to execute on that with all their fears and considerations. So before we get into that, which is the crux of our conversation, and we did this on stage as well, digital transformation, boom, buzzword, it's everywhere. You can't, turn on a podcast and not run into it. Can we define it? Can you define it in a way that that'll set us up for the rest of our chat for the audience?
Absolutely. And I love doing this. I think it's so important to set the foundation of what we're talking about when we say digital transformation, because it's such a huge area. There's so many different aspects. It touches almost every aspect of business. So the way I define it is it's organization-wide change that captures, creates, and delivers value, leveraging new technologies. And I think this is an important element. The technology part is an enabler. It allows us to do a lot more than we used to be able to do within the business space. But at the core of it, it's really transforming an organization and taking the people of the organization on this journey towards the digital future. So can your company survive and thrive in that digital economy? If not, if you want to survive and thrive, what other kind of technology solutions can help you do that? And that's where digital transformation comes in.
I heard a stat yesterday from someone chatting on a podcast. 45% of CEOs, when polled, I think this was in North America. I forget. It was one of the big four had done it. KPMG, I think, don't believe that their business, if maintaining the current trajectory, will be still viable in 10 years. And I might be butchering it a little bit, but it was powerful, it's organizational wide, it's creating and capturing value, it's technology, and it's about meeting a digital future. And if you don't, the consequences are severe.
It's existential as a question, right? It comes down to, can companies that were built and grown in generations of the past survive in the future? And this future environment, we're not just looking at the organizations and the way we do business changing, but we're looking at people changing as well, customers as well as employees. We're looking at new kinds of service offerings, new expectations, new engagement and touch points. Literally every aspect of the business is transforming, and a big trigger for this change are technology trends. And it's the first time in history that we're really seeing technology driving behaviors, technology disrupting industries. And I think it's an exciting time if you are, as a company and as business leaders, aware of what should get done and how to get it done. Otherwise, it can be a scary journey.
Is this also presenting the reality that companies might not just be around for those 50-year companies, those legacy, we've done it the way we do it, we make small incremental, we're slow to change. And of course you read, the number of companies that sat on whatever index now used to be 50 years. Now it's only 12 years. Are we also getting into a time where we're just seeing so much more churn, to use that word a bit loosely?
I believe that it's getting a lot more challenging to be industry leaders as an organization.
Okay.
I'm not so sure, or I wouldn't say so straightforward. Companies are just going to kind of crash and burn. I think,
that was a very doom and gloom question. I understand.
Yeah. I mean, we've all heard about Kodak and, Blockbuster and all these different examples. But are companies really going to so quickly get disrupted? I don't believe so, simply because there is still enough demand in the market and there's still enough going on in the business world. I believe in abundance, so I believe there's enough space in the business world to survive and continue as large organizations. What's going to be more challenging, though, is keeping that level of profitability, the level of margins, the level of growth that they traditionally had, these large companies.
Right.
And the competitive landscape is shifted. Right? You're not just competing against industry peers anymore. You're competing against startups that very quickly become key players in the market. You're competing against players from other industries that are crossing boundaries and coming into your industry. And so this landscape is completely different today. And I think that's where the danger comes in.
That makes a lot of sense. And necessarily that moat that used to keep those disruptive startups out of your marketplace, now technology that barrier is dropping. Back to your coding comment, the low code, no code. Like, so many of us non-technical people can all of a sudden spin up something very quickly by bolting together a few different services. And I know that's at a very small level, but that used to often be the barrier that kept someone out of your space. And that's going away.
I think what's going to be the barrier in the future for smaller organizations are going to be things like AI governance. The larger organizations will have the resources and the investment to set up governance around technologies like AI that are going to be very disruptive. The smaller companies will struggle to set up, those regulatory requirements, those types of. But traditionally, what we used to see were, industry boundaries like competitive landscape, size, scale. Those things are, very quickly becoming irrelevant across different industries because technology is allowing for exponential growth. A company that's starting up today can access a global marketplace without having a physical presence in any one location, right? So you have access to the entire world through online channels. And this is one example of how companies are kind of able to grow very quickly. And technology helps you, as you said, do so many different things. You don't need to. There's a really interesting. I wonder if you've seen this. It's called GPT Boss, and it's a site.
No, I have not seen it. I have not.
You should check it out. So it allows you to put together a team of, AI experts, and in that sense, it's like ChatGPT but patchwork. So you can have a social media expert and a legal expert and an accountant. So you put together this sort of AI team. So as an individual starting a company, you don't necessarily have to go and hire an accountant or a marketing expert because you have these, GPTs that can support you now, which is very, very interesting.
I heard this builds. I have not seen that, and I will check it out. It's on my to-do when I get off. But also this conversation I heard I ran into recently in a podcast about the one-person billion-dollar company that went, like, how long until that happens? Because we can create so much leverage. It was an interesting little thought experiment that I think eavesdropping on a podcast, and that's what they were talking about.
Well,
that
Tyler,
fits very much into what you just said. What's that?
Let me one up you on that.
Okay,
what about a no people company that's going to be worth $1 billion?
Yes. Okay. That seems scarier for some reason.
We've got companies that are trial running or testing AI or bot CEOs, right? So Dictator is a company in Poland it's a drinks company that set up a chief executive that's an AI robot. And so it's very interesting to see.
My mind is blown. I get it, but my mind is still blown.
It's interesting to see how this will evolve and develop. So at the moment, the chief executive or the CEO is supporting with a lot of analytics and market expansion, market growth, product development, those types of areas, and not necessarily managing people. But how soon are we going to see an environment where machines are going to be managing people in the workforce? I think that's an interesting question that will come up pretty soon.
Well, it brings me full circle because we have to get to the people. That was a great segue back to the people. You did a TED Talk. I'm not sure when it was, but very, very interesting. And there was a portion of the TED Talk that you got into at the end that I really loved because it got a bit feisty and it got a bit, I'm not going to say controversial, but you started to poke out at the world around how are we holding accountable? What are we agreeing to from a values contract perspective? And what are the consequences as leaders, executives, when we don't maintain our end of the bargain? Is it that we will be replaced by an AI bot that has now that built into it from the perspective of these are our values, these are the guardrails of what we will and will not do? Like, does that set the stage for that type of thing of like, as leaders, we either get better or we get replaced? That's a very, again, harsh statement for a reason. Mm-hmm.
I think, the thing that motivated me to talk about this aspect of the TED Talk and to be a little bit more provocative is I do see a lot of leaders in the tech industry not demonstrating the values that we need. And it's getting to a point where the technology that we are building is going to have the values of those people that are building them. Yeah. And this comes back to your question now. I think having the technologies take over or lead and having them being built, these technologies being built by people who don't have the human values and the prioritizations that we need as a society. Yes. That's going to be very, very dangerous. And that's a scary thought for me. That's what keeps me up at night. If there's going to be an AI or an algorithm that's going to decide things that's impacting my life or the life of, people in certain parts of the world that are maybe underrepresented or, people from remote areas where they don't have real control over what they can and cannot do. For example, someone who's depending on a bank loan or someone who's depending on HR recruitment process to get their next job. If you have AI systems that are built, and we as human beings, we have biases, right? This is a fact.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. It isn't a bad thing. It is what it is. It's a fact. And our biases are built based on individual experiences, our cultures, the way that we have developed our education, our professional journeys. all of these life experiences impact the way we think and feel. This is human fact. The problem comes in when we are unaware of these biases and when we build systems that reflect these biases. And AI algorithms are reflecting these biases. And that's where it gets very challenging. And so my TED Talk was to kind of trigger the point around we need to start thinking about people who are leading these big organizations that are building these transformative technologies and tell them and hold them responsible for the tech that they're building. At the moment, we don't even have visibility for what's being built in those companies.
I love that we've kind of taken it here. I was recently at actually the Science Center here in Calgary host an adult night where they have music and lights and they serve drinks and they bring in a very different audience to get exposed to. And one of the speakers, a friend of mine, really talked about where are we giving agency? And she used a bunch of headlines and said, AI did this. She goes, we're giving agency to AI, but not who built the AI. And she was really like warning us as an audience to be careful with how AI did something. She's like, no, AI is created by humans and humans infiltrate and implement and put their layers of thinking. And then she showed other headlines where it's like Google's AI did this. She's like, who has agency now? Maybe it's Google. But it really caused me to go, oh, wow, how quickly do we get caught into pointing at the AI where what you're making very clear is like, oh, no, we need to look one layer above that and realize the risks and rewards of a group of individuals putting something together. And you said often a black box is what it's in now. Mm-hmm.
It is really a black box. And I think it comes back to, maybe this sounds a little bit controversial, but it comes back to the same argument about weapons, right? Guns in the hands of people. Guns don't kill people. It is really people who kill people using guns. And it's the same with AI. It's the same with any technology that we build. And honestly, if we take a real hard look at what's happening, in the world, in the media today, it is really the people who are building those technologies who keep saying those technologies are dangerous. So why aren't we listening?
Red flag. It's a red flag, Kamales. That is. I love the concept of be careful where we're pointing. Where it's almost Disney-like as we're giving human characteristics to this technology. When there's a layer of humans right behind you telling you what they built. Don't step over there. I built a trap. Oh, weird. Why did you do that? And then why are you telling me it's there, but acting like it wasn't your idea? That is actually quite interesting. We're not believing
them enough, and we're still stepping into those traps. So.
Yes, we are. Oh, that's a hole. So, okay. Wow. And we swing down to a hole. I promised some rabbit holes, and here we are. So let's talk about the reality of I'm a human, and I'm showing up, quote unquote, at work, whatever that is for me. And all of a sudden now I'm being hit with change that is overwhelming me. I'm being hit with it everywhere. I'm hit with it at home. I get a new iPhone. It's overwhelming me. Social media, the news, and now I show up at work. It almost feels like there's no safe place from this rapid aggressive change, which I think, you touched on our talk around the human side of grief, and that just let's talk about, because that hasn't really changed a lot in the last few years, maybe thousands, or incrementally versus technology that's now changing by the minute.
I think that's a really interesting concept, especially the part that you mentioned about, there's so much change happening in your personal life and in, everywhere around us, including at work. The biggest difference is, and I think we have to really distinguish that, in our personal life, as we adopt technology, it is our choice. Individuals decide, I would like to adopt this technology. I like what it's giving me. I'm getting something back out of it. And so we choose to then, use virtual reality or, join the metaverse or use an AI algorithm, whatever it may be. At work, we don't have that option oftentimes. It's something that's mandated where, the powers that be decide, okay, we need to transform something. We need to implement a new system, and XYZ system is going to be implemented. The challenge with that is we feel this loss of control as human beings. We feel, and oftentimes companies, and, I've done this for over 24 years. I've worked with companies across industries and across regions. And it's always very shocking for me that companies tend to take this route of, we don't need to inform people, we just do what we do, and the communication will come later. So this element of, taking people on the journey of transformation or change is often overlooked, or it's seen as a nice to have, or something that often gets cut out of the budget as well. So change management gets cut out, communication gets cut out. And we have to remember, the human kind of the way people behave, or the human brain works in such a way. As soon as we hear something that makes us fearful, as soon as we it could be a rumor, it could be something that's discussed at the water cooler, it could even be a communication that goes out that's not clear enough. We go into immediate survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, we are fearful and we are emotional, and decisions are made then based on emotion. And one of two things happens, right? We go into this denial aspect, oh, that can't be, it's not going to impact me. Or we shift then into this resistance. We don't want to accept this change is going to happen. So either I leave the company because I feel very strongly about this change, or I keep my head down and I withdraw and I wait to see what happens. And I've seen this reaction in organizations, in the workforce, and in teams so often, where people kind of keep their head down and say, okay, let's wait and see what happens. Is this going to be successful? Am I really going to be impacted by this? If companies are able to trigger enough change and action where you can turn this into a positive and communicate and kind of take people on that journey, they will go into this exploration phase. We trigger curiosity. What could this be, right? Why are we doing this? Could this be interesting for me? Oh, maybe it could have a value for me as an employee. And then we go into commitment, because now you're curious and you start using whatever it is. And if it's a good system or a good change, it creates commitment. And so this is very similar to the stages of grief, but it comes back to applying it within the business environment. And this change happens whether it's a new core system replacement that's massive, that takes a year long, or if it's a small change that's happening within the organization, for example, a new CEO or a new system that's being implemented within one department, you always see the same human reactions. And this is where I think, as someone who's worked with companies in implementing tech and business transformation initiatives, I've had to become almost an expert in looking for these signs and understanding why people are reacting the way they react, and taking people on that journey and kind of getting buy-in and, engaging on a very human level. And sometimes it's just as simple as listening to people and understanding why they have a certain fear and what's worrying them. So it's almost therapeutic at a certain level, right? So you have a coffee and tell me what's bothering you.
The power of a good conversation with a little bit of empathy and a little bit of curiosity goes. And is it just like, we've been running organizations for decades and decades? Organizational workplace psychology. It's not a new field. Why do we keep messing up what sounds like the similar? You said they make this choice. Oh yeah, we'll deal with it later. We'll just do what we do. We're going to blast forward. It sounds very that agro leadership team type A. Let's just get her done. Casualties will happen. It feels like we can't afford to keep making that same mistake, but yet it sounds like we are.
It's a very interesting question that I've asked myself many times, because where I stand, it seems like a very easy change to make to save yourself a huge amount of problems within an organization. It does come down to several different aspects. I would say the company culture, in terms of the hierarchical structure and the way decisions are made. It does also come down to the system or the way management teams, for example, are rewarded, right? You're not rewarded on the way you communicate with your people or the buy-in from employees, but you're rewarded on executing the strategy or implementation or investing in a technology that's tangible. And so, in 3 months, you want to get your bonus as a leader in your organization, and you need to tick off certain boxes, and you don't have time to spend, managing people, which could take a little bit longer. So I think this is where, we need to look at several different elements around where the company culture is, what kind of leadership do we have, what kind of reward structures or systems do we have. What we found, though, is in working with companies and kind of helping them shift this process, we've been able to impact up to 15% in terms of project savings or cost savings, and significantly reduce the amount of times the projects fail or have to be restarted with these implementations. So we look at the human side at the very beginning of transformation, and that has been able to kind of give us the tangible results that we're looking for within project.
Do you find when you first get engaged by an organization, how often is that the ask, or is it, hey, we need to do X, and like I guess it's that perfect client that shows up already understanding what they need versus you consulting your way through the maze of, no, we just need to do this thing and I need you to help me. What about the human side? Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I just need to do the thing. How much is that part of those first few meetings, I wonder?
That's a really good question. I've never been approached with this human side being the priority angle.
Okay.
It's always.
I'd hoped it was at least once or twice, maybe, not never.
No, it's always been us kind of consulting, my team and I consulting with the clients and telling them this needs to be part of your priority. I've even had the experience of one client that we started working with in 2019, where back then we proposed, as part of the transformation roadmap, one of the initiatives should be this people side or this culture change aspect. Mm-hmm. And it was turned down at the time, completely rejected. And, we said, okay, let's concentrate on the other elements. And then once COVID hit, after COVID, there was a shift in mindset. And so in 2021, 2022, this was triggered again. They revisited the kind of original objectives and said, hey, maybe we should think about. So we have actually executed that successfully now. And that's really exciting to see this mindset shift. But I'm a big believer in not forcing people or companies to do things that they're not ready for.
Yeah, it won't work anyways, typically. Has COVID had that impact across on a broad scale? Obviously, global the asteroid that hit us all kind of almost at the same time. And it did shift so much so quickly that maybe it was moving in a direction, but it was taking a while. Have we settled back into, or has that changed a little bit of that thinking? Like, would you say that company would have been more ready now just because of COVID and other companies like it?
I think many companies have, they started to show, especially the companies that I've been interacting with, they started to show a shift in mindset. There was this huge amount of, it was triggered by fear. It was triggered by a change in, the expectations of employees and expectations of how you do things. And so that was so refreshing and so welcoming. I was so excited to see that shift happen in the corporate world. But I feel like we're shifting back now. And we're hearing a lot of companies kind of start to demand, back to office 100%, and, the kind of Zoom fatigue and all of these different elements. So the problem with that, though, Tyler, and I'd like to hear your view as well, perhaps this is something you see differently in Canada, but the problem with that is employees have changed. People have realized you don't actually have to work in that traditional way. There are options, there are alternatives, and you can still be productive. So the mindset shift has happened with the workforce, but not with the leadership.
I have biases because we as an organization went full remote during COVID like everyone, and then we went all in on it. We've actually of course I had just signed 2 5-year leases. So I really was all in on 2019. So I had a very clear cost structure that we're going back to the office because of all these reasons often was just because I was paying for the space. So we let it sit idle and we went to full remote, and some of our team members left that weren't aligned with it. But our ability to track talent, our ability to be that employer in our sector that didn't make you come back to the office has become a recruiting value proposition for us. And it's also our culture is, I would say, better than it's ever been. Our teams that were commuting an hour each way, our teams that were like, I don't mind working a little bit later because when I turn off my computer, I can walk down the hallway and my day is done. So we've really embraced it. And I've still seen more companies go the other direction. I've kind of doubled down on it, and it's become, for now, a differentiator for us in terms of recruiting.
That is really incredible. We also have a fully remote team. And we also have, a very small core team, but a much larger extended group of experts that we work with. So they plug in and out of projects.
Very similar model.
So I think this is, but it does depend on the kind of company culture and the kind of people that accept that. I have had experiences with people who were employees in past years who couldn't commit to that sort of structure. They wanted this, fixed 9 to 5, go to a physical space, sit at a desk kind of structure. And I work with people who are predominantly, they have this entrepreneurial spirit. They want to work in a different way. They want to grow and they want to expand. And they're self-motivated and they're not afraid to take on new challenges, because we work with things that are so completely new sometimes and so disruptive that, I want people to feel motivated by it. And this is the exciting thing, that we've been able to bring together a group of people that thrive in that situation.
Which I love. And I don't know, but okay, now we're getting into your thoughts on just what we're really talking about is personalization. I want it the way I want it. And I'm absolutely can dovetail into your organization, but I don't need to be in an office. I don't like that. Or my wife works in the energy sector. Very much in Calgary, the energy sector was a back to office culture immediately. But she's like, I'm okay with it. I miss her. I loved having her at home. It was lovely. But she's like, no, I don't mind going to the office. It's fine. And that's what that sector, and she's totally fine with it. Where I often reach out to my staff and I often ask them, say, hey, what's the one thing I could do to, make your life better? And she goes, that most of them will say, just, I don't want to go back to the office. Just don't be that company who said we weren't and now we are. And it's so funny when that's the thing that comes out, because they've self-identified and built a life. And I've had conversations with team like, what do you love best about Clearmotive? They're like, well, I can get a load of laundry done during the day. I get, like, as a self-respecting CEO, it was fun to hear that the biggest value propositions were the way it improved their life. Not that we had a foosball table, just to pick on that for a second. So it's been a really fun journey also of me shifting my own beliefs to be okay with things. Before I would have been like, what do you mean you're doing an appointment in the middle of the afternoon? Oh, but you're getting your work done. You're meeting your milestones. So that's okay because you've personalized it to work for you while still being respectful to your coworkers and our clients. But it's been working so well.
You've kind of mentioned the word that I absolutely love, being respectful to coworkers, right? And clients. And I think that respectful element, it's not for us to judge people's lifestyle and how they've set themselves up, but the kind of flexibility that hyper-personalized working models allow is we can be whatever, we can design our life. And I like to say this to our teams as well. We have designed our lives as we need it. So the work is designed into our life, right? So my working life is designed in a way that I'm able to also do a lot more things. I can do, I can go travel the world for speaking engagements. I still can spend time with my daughter and also take my dog for a walk during the day. And so there's so much that...
I'd probably still crush a ton of work, I'm going to bet as well.
Yeah, some days I really wonder how. But yes, and I'm writing my next book at the moment as well. So
amazing.
As I get older, I start to think about, is this sustainable? But then the way that I've designed my working model at the moment, I can ramp up, ramp down as I see fit. And so I really love this. And I think the companies that are truly going to struggle are the ones that are not able to create this hyper-personalized working models that are going to attract talent in the future. People have started taking on multiple jobs as well. And we're seeing this huge growth of overemployment, where people have, multiple full-time jobs, where in regions where it's allowed, and part-time jobs where it isn't. And we're seeing this, technology enabling that, right? Not just AI, but also just access to good servers and Wi-Fi's and laptops and kind of portable devices, where we have such a setup today with technology that we can work from anywhere as much and however we want. And so companies are going to struggle because it's not so much about, I'll pay you, you come in, because now there are other revenue sources for people to kind of tap into. So it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years to see how bigger companies, more traditional companies, tap into the kind of war for talent and how they're going to attract people back into the workforce with that.
Because the genie's out of the bottle on that one. Like, it's not going to come back. I agree there's a shift and a pullback, but I think especially younger generations, as they move up, they're going to expect they're going to demand, they're not even going to expect, they're going to demand a different level of engagement with their employers. And I think that's okay. I think that's, both you and I clearly are biased. So let's take a moment and pause, because everyone's like, okay, you two are really all in about the flexibility and the personalization. Talk to me about the human journey if you're working with a large organization where people are on site and now they feel this sense of like, oh, this technology, this adoption is being done to me. We've talked a little bit about companies and how they need to take that more seriously. Let's talk a little bit about the individual humans. What do you say to that individual to coach them? And that's even on a one-on-one basis to say, okay, this is happening in your organization. Let's talk about how you meet the change, how you engage with it, how you manage those fears. Because like you said, it still comes back down to the individual. Eventually, you're going to get down to individual humans having the experience.
I think the journey starts from, obviously, as our teams are really small, we don't get the opportunity to speak to entire workforces. So if we work with a bigger company, we have a couple of strategies that we tend to take. The first step is always recognizing the challenges or the issues, right? So if we come into an organization and we've been brought in by the CEO and or COO or whatever top leadership, we typically come in through that level. And we start looking at what the company intends to do. Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself? And once we start working with the organization, we start defining, where you are today, what's your journey going to look like, what does that transformation roadmap look like, and where you want to see yourself end up as an organization and within what time frame. So this is the digital transformation process. But we add to that the layer of the human side of things, where we start understanding what are some of the challenges from a culture perspective this company is facing. So there might be things like cognitive biases that they may be dealing with, right? So for example, if an organization has tried to implement certain technologies in the past and they've not been successful or they haven't delivered the results that they need, there might be a impression or a belief within the organization that, these technologies don't work. They're not successful. So they're starting again. It's not going to work for us and so on. So this is one of the cognitive biases that we might face. So if we bring in a new solution that we want to implement, we're not going to get buy-in because they failed before. Failure is another big one, right? Aversion to failure. As human beings, we are more resistant to failure than we are with the enticement of success. So we rather not fail than, see any potential to win. And I think this is a big one to recognize, because when we build use cases and when we build business cases to demonstrate to leadership and teams that this is going to work, we have to keep that in mind. We're not going to be able to entice organizations with just what you could have, but we need to entice them with what you won't lose as well. So that plays a role in terms of how we build our business cases. There might be elements of groupthink where teams tend to decide, what's agreeable and not necessarily what's the best solution. And typically we see this with IT teams that try to drive decisions around what technology to select or how to implement certain things, where you find business teams or business unit teams not wanting to go against IT. You might find elements of bystander effect, where no one wants to take responsibility for a decision. That's a big one as well.
Yeah.
So you have lots of people chiming in, but when you ask, okay, who's going to sponsor this and who's going to kind of take the lead, and then you have silence and crickets in the room. So another big one that maybe is not so easily recognizable is system justifying belief. And this is something we deal with as well quite often. And this is where you have people within the organization who believe that what they do is the best way to do it and the only way to do it. And they have to believe that, because if they start addressing pain points and issues, it's really a big problem that they would have to deal with, right? It's like opening a can of worms. And so they tell themselves, no, this is how it's always been done and this is how it's going to work. And so when we come into situations where we try to propose new ways of working, and remote work is one of those areas where we try to say, it could work differently if you just allow a little bit more flexibility. We get the resistance saying, no, we've always had people come into the office, so they have to come in. And it's recognizing these kinds of human reactions and emotions, especially when we talk to different individuals. And once we can recognize what the core issue is, then we can start addressing them and putting actions or techniques into place where we can start shifting mindsets and gaining trust with people. So we typically start with leadership teams where we say, have their expectations set, what can be done and what can't be done and what should be done in terms of transformation. How aggressive should they be with their ambitions? What can the organization actually deliver on the ground? And once we've set the expectations with leadership, we then drive through the organization and try to understand who are the key influencers of the company. Right? Not necessarily people in top positions, but people who are able to rally the teams and influence people and their mindset. And so this might be, in one occasion, we actually had engagement with someone who's working in the cafeteria of the organization. And the cafeteria was a big part of the social interaction and the social network of the company.
That was their social media. The kitchen was the social media area of the company, right?
Exactly.
All the talking happened and all
that's where everything happened. And people trusted him because he's been in the organization the longest and he knows the company. But he doesn't actually have anything to do with the business of the company. But the fact that we could engage with him and in very simple terms explain to him what we were doing as a team helped convert the key people in the organization, because he started telling everyone about, oh, this team's doing a great job. He had no idea what we were doing, but he liked us.
That's how did you get to that individual? Did someone point them out? I'm just curious, like that seems like gold, whether you're anytime you're trying to create influence, but how did you did the CEO go, you know who really is in control of this? You need to talk to Joe from the cafeteria. That's an amazing story.
It was interesting. It was pure observation. We were hungry, and just very casually observing the dynamics, and a lot of what we do is observation. So we do couple it with surveys and engagement touch points, stakeholder interviews, all these different proven techniques, but observation is a big one, and that plays into active listening. So looking at how people behave, and the cafeteria was the area where people were most comfortable. They connected the most with each other. There was this very kind of human ecosystem that existed there, and at the center of that was this individual.
That's so interesting. I recently went to a large head office in Toronto for a large multinational, their Canadian division, and the woman at the front desk was so engaging and so curious, and got to know you in 2 seconds. And then we met the VPs, and they're like, "Oh wow, and they're like, "Oh, that's who really runs." That's like, you could tell she just had this influence. She was literally that same individual. Marjorie runs the show around here. Oh, everybody knows. And she just took this ownership when you walked in, and she was reading you, but doing it in such a fun way. I'm like, oh, wow. And then everyone else kind of agreed to it. So that she would have been an influencer in that organization.
That's amazing.
Masquerading as someone just behind the front desk. There was much more going on than I think could easily be assumed at first blush. Who in the organizations where you see the greatest success, who owns it? Are you brought in at the senior level? Are you brought in the middle, but then senior buys in, like responsible versus accountable? Like, is there a formula, or am I being oversimplified, where it's really just, it depends on the organization?
It really does depend on the organization, but I think in the past, or in the early days of our company, we used to engage a lot with team leads, right? So project team leads and implementation teams. And we find that, and this is where we find the distinction between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation. And we often hear these terminologies being used, in the same aspect, but there is a difference. If you are working with individuals within, or teams within, a certain area of the business and implementing a solution within that space, the impact and the potential return on investment is limited within that area of business. So that doesn't really bring organization-wide transformation. And so the impact is so limiting, and that's a project implementation, I would say. When we really want to see transformation, it has to work from top down first. And this, I truly believe, based on my experience, when we have C-level executives or board members bringing us in and buying into what we're saying, and sponsoring and supporting what we're doing. And sponsoring not necessarily in terms of paying the bill, but saying we completely agree this is what needs to get done. We see that trickle down through the organization. And it will be middle management that then says, okay, we have to do it now because the leadership have told us to. But that gives us then access to them, and we can eventually buy in their trust and start engaging with them. And then that trickles down through the organization. When it comes to implementation and making sure that the solutions are successfully taken on, then we have to work with the workforce. People who are actually using the solutions. So it has to come top down and bottom up, but I typically go top down first.
On that same vein, and you kind of spoke to it, but I'm curious, is there a crawl, walk, run approach? It's like, we're going to change everything. Okay, whoa, so let's change one thing at a time. Let's work. I was in a room years ago now, and it was with some very large Canadian-based or North American-based companies, and they were sharing through kind of a roundtable some of their successful digital initiatives. And what I was shocked with was how small they were, but how celebrated they were at companies that usually took 6 months to do anything new. These were getting done in 6 weeks or 6 years sometimes. And they were large. One was a large ag fertilizer manufacturer. The other one was a railroad. So very slow moving, big. But what it took me back, I was expecting to hear big, bold stories. But what I heard was little, small, incremental improvements on, we got this done way faster. We got approval in a week, not a year. And it was interesting. And this was a few years ago. So admittedly, it was early on. But hearing you chat, to really see that impact, you've got to go a little bit larger to kind of really prove it out. Is that just also the cycle of where we are in the journey of things getting bigger and the stakes getting higher?
So the smaller initiatives add up to the big ones. And I think this is where, we see trigger points within the organization. So when we work with smaller departments, those are digitalization initiatives. where, small successes start the process of shifting
digitization
mindsets.
versus transformation, and really understanding the difference between those two. Mm-hmm.
And so that triggers mindset shift, though. So if you're saying, they've implemented a solution that allows them to reduce turnaround time or increase the touch points within the organization without increasing costs, those are little successes that are worth celebrating. But is that enough to prepare your organization for the disruptive digital future? Probably not. And so the digital transformation element then is very, very important to have this bigger picture in mind, and the roadmap of little initiatives that contribute to that are important to have as well. What I've seen in the past, though, is organizations complete the digitalization pieces and tick off the box saying, we've done transformation.
I see.
And oftentimes, when I
one,
deal with
one masquerading as the other.
Yeah. But it comes back to the definitions and understanding of what transformation truly is. And implementing a AI system that helps decision making with C-level executives, that's not transformation. It does speed up decision making. It might offer more data and insights and might allow you to make more intelligent decisions quicker. But it doesn't impact the entire organization unless you implement a full AI-based decision system across the entire business value chain that allows the whole organization to work quicker and more efficient. So there's but what we don't do though, Tyler, is we don't walk into a company and say you've got to change everything, right? That's counterproductive.
Yeah.
We do tend to assess the environment and start with the little pieces that can have the biggest impact, especially if there's a big amount of resistance in the company, where people don't want to change what they're doing, the way they're doing it. So we do tend to take the small initiatives and the small successes as ways to gain trust and ways to kind of build on that and create more transformation.
So going back to your original definition of like organizational wide versus digitization and project more localized to a certain group, a certain team, a certain problem to be solved. But if we're really going to define, just making sure I'm really unpacking that definition, digital transformation truly is thinking from an organizational wide perspective, where digitization, more localized, more problem solving, not bad, but different in terms of caliber, especially when it comes to future proofing and how do you stay the company that's the leader or become the disruptor in your space? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's a great word to use as well. It's future proofing, right? And I would suggest organizations really look at their own business model and structure and see if it is fit for future, to stress test your environment and think about different scenarios. So with digitization, if you imagine, most companies have done digitization already at this point, but there are still some companies around the globe that, they're struggling with Excel sheet versus a cloud-based system or an online system, right? There are still companies that still do accounting on Excel. And I've seen them. So,
a friend of mine was just brought in as a CEO for a private equity company. They just purchased a large industrial fence manufacturer, like chain link fences. And he's like, they still do their inventory in a ledger.
In a ledger.
And he goes, the manager's like, I've been here for 10 years. I know what's on every SKU. And he's like, oh, wow. Okay. So he said, Tyler, there's lots of opportunity for improvement.
Yeah. So that would be digitization. And when we talk about digitalization, then it's within a certain functional area or a business unit, right? So it could be the production unit of the company automating certain processes, implementing robotics process automation. You'll find improvements in that function, in that area, but it doesn't translate to the whole organization. Transformation then really looks at, every part of the organization, what needs to get done. And we've defined building blocks to help companies do this more efficiently and more in a simplistic way. So the building blocks are 4 elements. So it could be customer experience design. The second one is products and service digitization. The third is people, process, and organization structures. And the fourth being business model innovation. And whenever we work with an organization, we do an assessment across all these 4 building blocks. And we identify, where could be the most impactful element, where could be the initiative that brings in quick returns, that are quick wins. And we create the roadmap across all 4 quadrants. And we then prioritize it with them and say, perhaps your best place to start, where you have the biggest challenge or the biggest opportunity, could be customer experience. You might look at increasing touch points. You might look at better engagement with customers. You might look at better journey design. whatever that may be, or even new ways to engage with customers on new channels. So let's start there. But eventually, you need to address the other building blocks. If you're creating a new channel to market, that might result in new acquisitions or new orders from your customers. And in order to process those orders more effectively, you still have to ensure your process, your technology environment, as well as your people are trained, and you need to ensure that you might have more digitized products and make them available on these channels. So it does eventually impact all of the building blocks. But it allows us to then define where's the best starting point. Let's break this down and make it more manageable.
But like anything, you're working with humans, having wins, seeing successes, seeing step 1, step 2, step 3 work, incremental buy-in increases, right? Mm.
Absolutely. And it makes it easier for us to tell our story. It makes it easier to earn trust and get buy-in. And it is less overwhelming as well, because one of the biggest fears with digital transformation that we've noticed with companies, when I speak to leadership teams, they always say, we've done, we are a 50-year-old company, we've done X, Y, Z, and we have so much value. Do you expect me to throw it all out? And the answer is no, we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We're just making the baby work more efficiently.
I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, we're refreshing the water slowly. I know that's, like, I'm not sure how to build that metaphor properly.
Yeah, but you get what I mean, right? So we need to leverage on the company's existing strengths.
But that comes back to one of your comments earlier about the biases of like, well, we've worked on this, it's perfect, because we have to believe that, or we'll question, and is this also, this isn't done. This isn't always on. And that's a cliche way to say it, but this is one increment to the other. Like you said, eventually the 4 pillars will all be influenced. I've encountered leadership teams who are like, well, we did leadership training last year. What do you mean we have to do it again? Isn't it done? Didn't we check that box off? Getting away from that box checking mindset.
The box checking mindset is a huge challenge, particularly with leadership teams. And I think, there are a few CEOs that I've worked with who look beyond themselves in that role, who say, it's about the company because I love this company and I love this business. And I want to make sure that it's set up in a way that even once I retire, they're going to be a brand that's going to be strong in the market. And that's kind of what, that's an ideal scenario. Whereas most people that we work with, even myself, I tend to think as far as, my involvement in something, right? This is human nature. Yeah. So what happens after I'm not around? What happens beyond that? And I think this is where we need to start looking at things beyond the current organization environment. So one of the elements that we start with for the human side is to look at purpose. What is the purpose of the organization? What are the values that are being embodied within this company, and how that aligns with the values and purpose of individuals in the company? And when you have a shared purpose, that's when you start stepping back and looking beyond your role in the company and start thinking about what is the value that we're creating in the market. It's not a company's purpose, I believe, is not to make money. A company's purpose is to add certain value in the market to customers.
And the byproduct of that, the scorecard, is that people give you money for it.
People pay, yeah, exactly. That's a happy coincidence or outcome of it. But at the end of the day, we all, and you mentioned it earlier as well, the next generation of people, they are purpose driven, right? If we look at the, the millennials and the alpha generation and the Gen Zs, I have a Gen Z at home. Actually, she's a cusp alpha Gen Z, and she operates completely differently. As a 13-year-old, she questions, why do I need a bank account? Why do I need? And she has started up 2 online businesses selling slime and selling paper dolls, and she's generated revenue at her age.
That's amazing. It's through building a business, not just trading her time. Like that's such a different mindset. That's a very different human being 10 years from now.
It's a different human being. So what kind of organization is going to be able to attract that generation of people, right? And so they are looking for purpose. They're looking for, and I know I'm generalizing, and not everyone is
of course
into that box, but as a generation, the generational shift, we're seeing this shift happening. We're seeing people become more concerned with climate change, more concerned with diversity, more concerned with, contributing to a higher purpose and doing good in the world. And I think companies that are able to define their purpose will be able to then bring people together towards this shared purpose and ensure still business success with that.
do you feel that, like, from a leadership, or like, is there enough empathy for that reality? Because, like, technology will come and go and new tech will come in, but you could have the same core purpose and go through many iterations of just getting better. I was listening to a Bezos and he said, stop building businesses based on what's going to change, build businesses on what's going to stay the same. And if the people care about purpose and that's important, the technology you use to execute just become the tools. It was just a nice shift of, like, we're so like, oh, how's this going to be disrupted? What's going to be the same? And then how do I build off that? Do you find that there's enough businesses really being empathetic for that reality, that people will continue to be one of their biggest variables going forward and technologies will come and go and morph and change?
I think empathy, you mentioned a really, really good point there. It is so important and it's necessary. I don't see it enough in the business world at the moment. But I'm taking a different approach. I'm trying to lead by example, where I demonstrate the empathy and try to push people in that direction.
Lead by example, but also push from behind. I fully appreciate that.
And so the push from behind comes from the fact of, I've had C-level executives who've said point blank in a workshop session for culture change, I'm motivated by money. That's it. Right. And so when you look at it at surface level, then it becomes very alarming. Okay, you're only motivated by money. You're already in C-level. You are earning a lot already. So how do I motivate you further to make this change? And this is where we need to understand, let's look beyond that, right? What does that statement come from? How does this person tick? What is the motivation behind wanting to have, a secure financial environment? And so this is where we start digging deeper and trying to understand more about the human aspect of it. And that's where empathy plays a huge role, because without that empathy, it would be very easy to just kind of say, okay, you're an a-hole and I'm not going to be able to do anything with you.
Sometimes there is just that, right? Sometimes you have to go, because I think you said on stage that you do have a no a-hole policy, or you certainly try to vet them as soon as they can be sneaky, though. They can sneak through.
They can sneak through.
But they do show up sooner or later.
I do have a very, very strong policy with that, because we've just had so many experiences where, and also being a woman of color in tech, you've got to be very selective about which kind of environment you put yourself in. And so I think this is so necessary to have these boundaries. I also work with colleagues from other companies who don't mind the a-holes and say, that's where the money is. So
sometimes you know what they're, but even that comment about I'm only in it for the money. Well, are you in it for the security? Does it because it validates you as a person? Like, there's so many layers behind, like, that. It's always a cop out to say that. Like, what does it do? What is that money making you feel? That's actually your motivation. You're just saying money because it's easy.
Well, I can share about that, because we did dig deeper into that particular person's statement one-to-one, and it turns out he did grow up in a very, it was a poverty environment, and this level offered him a certain status and a sense of self.
100%.
And so what we, and this is not something that we typically do, but I was able to trigger questions with him about how do you separate your sense of self from your job, because your job is not you. And so this kind of conversation. So it's very strange as a technologist sometimes to go into this direction and have those conversations. But I do have a very, I think, a personal interest as well in engaging with people on that level. And I do find that it does bring the value that we want, or the change and shift that we want. And so, identifying areas where the person can identify status with implementation of certain projects or transformation initiatives, rather than just the financial aspect. And so that helped, to be honest.
I really appreciate it, and maybe why I enjoy chatting with you so much is that you identified to get to do the thing, you had to deal with the humanity that was in the way, or that could be the biggest leverage to get there. And you're right. It's years and years, and many, many years ago, I worked, I have a science background. I worked in nutrition coaching. I learned very quickly, it was not about calories. It was about what was between your ears. What was your view? How did you feel about yourself? And I was like, oh, this isn't about exercise and food. This is about the human being. And I'm kind of seeing a reflection a little bit. And you got into it for one thing, but quickly realized if I'm going to create change, I have to embrace the humanity of who I'm dealing with, which I think is a great little circle back for the human side of digital transformation.
Absolutely. And I love that you were able to kind of summarize it that way, because that's exactly what it is. And I do believe the companies and the leadership teams that are able to decode this or understand this are going to be hugely successful. We're still not there yet, because I do believe many of these companies are under so much pressure. And when you are stressed and under pressure, you're not thinking in those terms. But yeah, I still have a very strong hope for the corporate world.
I recently did a talk on the value of curiosity as a leadership trait and also to help from fixed or growth mindset. And I was searching Harvard Business Review. The number one reason curiosity gets sidelined in organizations is because it takes too much time and we're too busy for that. And I was like, just taking the time to go, I wonder, versus I have to know the answer because I'm under so much pressure. That's a very back to the infinite versus finite, which you alluded to earlier, and quarterly results sometimes don't drive the best behavior.
And there's two sides of the coin, right? If you start to wonder too much, you might start to question why things are done a certain way in a company. So
Overthinking can be problematic as well, but at the risk of starting a whole new section of this podcast, Kamales, thank you so much for, again, every time we chat, it just seems to get better. So I look forward to our next conversation because we'll get even deeper down the rabbit hole. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? I know you have a book, you're writing a new one, which is exciting. I know you have a book in market right now. Give me all the details for people to find out more.
Absolutely. So I am very active on LinkedIn. So if people want to connect with me, just go ahead and connect. I'm on kamaleslardi.com as well as my company, Lardi and Partner Consulting, or lardiandpartner.com online. My book is available on Amazon as well as the Wiley website. And I know it's available in some of the bookstores in Canada as well because I checked for the MESH conference. So it's called The Human Side of Digital Business Transformation.
Fantastic. Kamales, thank you for the work you do. And just thank you for taking the time. I really, really enjoyed it. This was a fantastic conversation.
I've enjoyed it as well, Tyler. Thank you for having me.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.